Welcome to Political Perspectives. I'm Hugo Gurdon, Editor-in-Chief of The Washington Examiner. If you're joining us on YouTube, please like and subscribe to our channel, now heading towards 250,000 subscribers. I'm joined, as I generally am, by Byron York, Chief Political Correspondent of The Washington Examiner. And Byron, let's talk about Jeffrey Epstein. A lot of people are talking about Jeffrey Epstein, but just yesterday, the House voted overwhelmingly, with only one vote against, to direct the DOJ to release documents. And there are so many questions that arise from this, not necessarily because of, as it were, what we know, but just from the peculiarities and oddities in the way that each side behaves on this, and which draws attention to it all. One of the things that Speaker Johnson said is that the Democrats had these documents in the Department of Justice, every single one of them, when President Biden was in power, in office, and none at no point during that time were people saying these documents have got to be released. This suggests that the timing is, as he says, a political stunt. Is that the case, or should we see it somehow differently?
No, I think that's the case. I think you can call this a political stunt. It was really a surreal day on Capitol Hill, by the way. They had a couple of hours of debate in which Republicans and Democrats are yelling at each other, which is not all that unusual. And then they all vote the same way, which is kind of unusual. After all of the conflict, with one exception, they all vote unanimously to release these files. Obviously, Donald Trump had done a total 180 on this. He had been opposed to release. Then he said, okay, release them. I don't care. There's a question about what this will actually uncover, about how much the Justice Department will actually release. But there is no question about what you just said, which is that the Biden administration, running the Justice Department for 4 years, had custody of all these documents. And not only could they have been released, but in more likely real life, they would have been leaked. I mean, if there was something really, really ugly and incriminating about Donald Trump, who was always out there on the political horizon as a threat to Joe Biden, of course somebody would have leaked this stuff, and they didn't.
Also, if there was anything deeply damaging to Trump, as you say, it would have been released already. And yet, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, delayed the swearing in of Congresswoman Grijalva, who was the final Democrat vote needed to force the vote on this matter. And President Trump and the White House pressed Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and some other Republicans not to vote for this. So why would Trump and Johnson go to such lengths to prevent the release of documents which contained nothing damaging?
Well, I think it's just Trump here. And all I can say is that the president will do anything to try to stop negative, information coming out, even if it's not sort of the worst sort of things. He just doesn't want any negative information to come out about him. But I will say that separate from this whole Justice Department release the Epstein file thing was the request that the House Oversight Committee, Democrats and Republicans, had made to the Epstein estate for the documents that they had, and they had a lot. And about 10 days, 2 weeks ago, we saw Democrats leak 3 emails, none of which were from Donald Trump, who doesn't do email. But they thought they were kind of incriminating Epstein saying things about Trump. And the Republicans said, hey, wait a minute. These 3 emails that were released were actually part of 23,000 documents that the Epstein estate gave us. And here they are. They posted them all on the web. And after a while, we had going through those, we had a very interesting picture. First of all, you hear that Donald Trump appears many, many, many times. He does. The reason he appears is not because he said anything. He didn't send anybody an email. He didn't call up anybody on the phone, and it was reported in these emails. It was all because Jeffrey Epstein couldn't stop talking about Donald Trump. He was obsessed with Donald Trump. So we got a picture of Epstein, who in 2008, remember, had pleaded guilty to sex trafficking of an underage girl. That was 2008. So a lot of these emails, almost all of them, are afterwards. And he's still hanging around with lots of people like Larry Summers, Bill
Right.
Gates, Michael Wolff,
Hmm.
who were still around him, except he has seen his enemy, Donald Trump, not be vanquished, but go on to become president of the United States. And
Right.
I think it drives him nuts with jealousy, resentment, whatever. And so he ends up talking about Trump all the time and seeing what he might be able to do to help bring Trump down, because that's what all Democrats are trying to do in 2017 and 2018.
Well, and exactly the impression that I got in looking at those three emails that you referred to before the massive release by Republicans. You could only read, any objective observer looking at those was looking at someone just the details from, without any wider context, but just the details of the from the emails themselves was of a fellow who was trying to do damage to Trump, which it hardly plays into the idea that Democrats wish to disseminate, that somehow Trump and Epstein were close and were buddies. Clearly, Epstein regarded Trump as an enemy, even if Trump didn't think very much about Epstein by that stage.
Yes, I will say that the emails have given fuel to some of the fever swamps who have all sorts of wild theories. One of which is they believe that Donald Trump on Thanksgiving of 2017, his first Thanksgiving as president, spends it in Mar-a-Lago, and then he spends it with Jeffrey Epstein,
Hmm.
which is absolutely crazy. Did not happen. They also think that Trump actually visited Epstein in Paris during Trump's first year as president of the United States. The president of the United States goes to visit an opulent apartment in Paris,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody notices, which is just astonishing. So, I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff, but the thing to remember is um, we have many accounts that have said Jeffrey Epstein was one of these guys who thought he was the smartest guy in the room.
Right.
And people like that, who have such an incredibly inflated self-regard, when someone they view as an inferior does better than they do,
Mm.
succeeds more than they do, climbs higher on society's ladder than they do,
Right.
they kind of go bonkers. And I think you see that obsession in Epstein all the way until he ends up committing suicide in a jail cell in 2019.
Yeah. So, just one final question or thought about Epstein. Given that we think that the Biden administration would have leaked or disseminated the worst that they could have done if there was anything really bad, given that there have been leaks already, and you presumably the leakers would not have done the ones wishing to do damage to Trump would have leaked the ones which were most likely to do damage to Trump rather than the most innocuous. Should we expect the facts to be a great deal less damaging politically to anybody, but particularly to Trump, than the speculation? And B, that being perhaps the case, does the Epstein matter finally get laid to rest, or is this just something which those who are in politics to sustained damaging arguments will just be able to make run through the next election and the next?
Well, it's all done. The Senate has voted it. The Senate, the House sent it to the Senate, and the
Oh,
Senate has
that's
said,
right. Yeah.
"Okay, we're not even gonna debate this thing." Boom, passed. I think what's going to happen is with whatever disclosures are made, they're going to be consistent with what we already know. And remember, we already know a lot. There's been a lot of legal cases, depositions, interviews, things that we all have the transcripts of. The flight logs of Epstein's planes, his contact lists, the prosecution of Ghislaine Maxwell. We have a lot of information now, these 23,000 documents from the Epstein estate. So I think we pretty much have the contours of what happened. So I think additional documents will show that President Trump and Epstein were friends or social friends in the 1990s, all the way up till about 2004, where it just stops. And
Right.
after that, there's nothing from Donald Trump in these files. And then, but Epstein, and we saw this in the estate documents. Then, after he pleads guilty in 2008, tries to restore his reputation, doesn't succeed,
Right.
but a lot of people, a lot of his old buddies, stick with him and keep going to his house, and they're in email contact with him all the time. But there's no Trump. He's
Right.
not there.
Right.
And so I think that's where we're going to continue to say. And then I think a couple of more things. I think the Democratic accusation will have to go back 20 years and say, well, Trump knew what was going on with Epstein. That is, he knew that criminal activity was taking place with
Right.
Epstein, and he didn't do anything. Although we have had accounts from the lawyers for the victims that Trump was actually quite helpful
Right.
to them. And then
Right.
the bigger question, will this finally go away? I think for a lot of Democrats, basically Epstein is the new Russia.
Right.
And Russia was used for the entire first term of Donald Trump to try to bring him down. And even when you had a long law enforcement investigation with the full powers of law enforcement, the Mueller investigation, that couldn't establish that any crime had taken place from Donald Trump. And it still didn't go away even then.
Right.
So my sense is you ask, will Epstein finally go away? And I feel that the answer is probably no.
It probably won't go away, but it seems to me, even weaker than the Russia stuff. So perhaps not as effective as that. So let's switch to the subject of Thomas Crooks, who was the young man now dead, who shot President Trump in Butler nearly 18 months ago, and in the process of trying to assassinate him, killed one of the spectators in the audience with President Trump. It's a long time ago that this happened, 18 months, but there's new facts and evidence and information that's emerging, which is, I think, will strike people as rather odd. Why didn't we know this earlier? What is emerging, Byron, and what should we conclude from it?
Yeah, I think it's going to make a lot of people like me pretty mad about this because you after the assassination attempt, which of course came within a couple of millimeters of killing a presidential candidate, um, we were basically told that Thomas Crooks was just kind of a blank. He was a cipher. He really didn't have much of an online presence. He was fairly, maybe the only young man in the world who didn't have an online presence, but he just didn't, and we just didn't know that much about him. And you can't really tell anything about the motives, and nobody did anything really terribly wrong, and blah blah blah. And you think, what in the world is this? And this is the head of the FBI. It was Chris Wray at the time, and other top officials telling that not just to us, the public, and us journalists, but also to Congress as well. And now we're learning, surprise, surprise, that actually Crooks did have an extensive online footprint. It was heavily politicized.
Mm-hmm.
He appears to have been, for a very brief time, very pro-Trump, and then he becomes extremely anti-Trump. And then he's advocating assassination as a way to solve political differences. And there's a video of him kind of practicing drawing a handgun in his room. And then there's also talk that he is linked to some websites involving, if not trans issues, what are called furry issues, which is kind of a sexual subset.
Right.
Um, and that he was using the pronouns they, them.
Right.
So there's a lot to look at there. And what we should say now is not that we have the answers,
Right.
but we know that what we were told back then was not the whole story. We knew
Right.
it at the time. We thought, wait a minute, this cannot be the whole story.
Right.
Uh, and so I really think the law enforcement agencies that were doing this should have to pay and explain what was going on.
Right. And so finally, just to sort of clarify that on that particular issue, what this looks like is the law enforcement agencies not wanting to tread in on sort of left of center issues like trans issues, pronoun issues, sexual deviancy issues, not wanting to sort of discuss the possibility that this psychotic young man, was in any way linked to these things which ultra progressive, ultra radical people on the left propagate and promote. They wanted to present him as a cipher so that they didn't touch these sort of modish, leftist, odd shibboleths. Is that right?
I think that's part of it, and I think it actually kind of resembles the what we saw after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, where Tyler Robinson, the young man charged with murdering Kirk, was heavily involved in trans issues. He had a boyfriend, and there was just a lot of trans ideology involved. And he said in texts that he had to kill Charlie Kirk because Tyler Robinson, just couldn't stand the hate anymore, the anti-trans hate. So these are real motives. They really exist. Maybe we don't understand them completely, but it's something you have to look at. And I certainly think if any of that is involved in Thomas Crooks, or even if it's not, we need to know the whole story because he came within a millimeter of assassinating Donald Trump.
Right, right. So, and the truth is, like, what we want is the information. We don't want the story. We don't want a narrative. We want to know, and adult, sensible, intelligent, reasonable Americans would like to know the facts, and they can judge for themselves, rather than to be spun a yarn and had things concealed for them by officialdom. So, anyway. We will leave it there, Byron. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you all, viewers, for joining us as well. Come back and see us again in a week's time on Political Perspectives.